Greetings. I'm Ed Steinfeld, the director of the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. Welcome to our special event today, Media and the Politics of COVID-19, a conversation between Democratic political consultant Jenny Backus and Republican political consultant Brian Jones and CNN senior Washington correspondent Jeff Zeleny. This event is part of Watson's Class of 2020 speaker series, connecting Brown alums and our senior fellows with our students in the lead up to degree conferral later this month. I just want to say congratulations to all of our graduating seniors. Congratulations to all of the students, frankly, in this very complicated time, but especially congratulations to our seniors. I'm just going to provide a very brief introduction to our guests in a moment, but let me say a bit about how this is going to work today. In a moment, I'm going to turn the floor over to Jenny, who's going to lead the conversation for about half an hour with Brian and Jeff. And then we're going to take questions from you all in the audience. And I really urge you to start thinking of questions even now. For those of you connecting via Zoom, you can ask questions via the Q&A box. Just type in your questions, and then I'll later read those questions to the panel. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you can submit questions there as well. And I'll have somebody pass those on to me, and I'll pass them to the panel. I especially want to encourage students from the class of 2020 to ask questions. And for any students, just do us a favor and mention your class year when you ask a question, so we can publicize that. Again, don't wait for the conversation to end to ask questions. Just start writing them into the Q&A box now. Some quick bios for our panelists. Jenny Backus, Brown class of 90, is the owner and president of the strategic communications firm Backus Consulting, which among its many different kinds of clients includes political campaigns. Jenny served previously as senior policy advisor and head of strategic partnerships and engagement for Google. And she also served in the first 2 years of the Obama administration as acting assistant secretary for public affairs and the principal deputy assistant secretary for strategy and planning in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Brian Jones is a partner at the strategic and public affairs firm, the BlackRock Group, which, like Backus Consulting, has a wide variety of clients, including national political campaigns. Over the past 2 decades, Brian has led communications and advocacy efforts across a number of areas, including support of marriage equality, early childhood education, eradicating child sex trafficking, and keeping kids safe online. Brian has served in senior roles in the presidential campaigns of George W. Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney, and Chris Christie. Jeff Zeleny is CNN's senior Washington correspondent covering the overall 2020 campaign. Most recently, he served as the network's senior White House correspondent covering the Trump administration, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, especially during the 2018 midterm election campaign when President Trump played such a pivotal role. This is actually the 3rd consecutive presidency that Jeff has covered. He's traveling across the country and around the world in recent years with George W. Bush and Barack Obama prior to President Trump. Prior to moving to CNN in 2015, Jeff was the senior Washington correspondent for ABC News. And prior to that, Jeff was the national political correspondent for the New York Times. And prior to that, the Chicago Tribune. So with that, Jenny, let me turn it over to you. The floor is yours. And let me just again say thank you to all of you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, and I just want to thank my alma mater for letting me be a part of this. This would have been my 30th class reunion, I hate to say. Not that I hate to say, I'm very proud of the class of 90, but it is amazing how fast time flies. And I just know it's such a special time in May on campus. But I also know that going to Brown, graduating to Brown, and sort of being part of my class. I know I have a couple classmates of mine even watching right now. Yeah, those are ties that you'll always have. And please, anybody who's interested in coming to Washington, the Watson Center has my contact information, and I'd be happy to talk to any of you. But for whatever you're doing, best of luck, and thank you so much for joining. Brian and Jeff, thank you guys for coming and having this conversation today. listening to the introductions here, I realized just how long we've known each other, and how many crazy things that we've seen during the presidential cycle. And that's actually something that I want to talk about today in our panel is, there's a great, I think it was actually, for those of you in the class of 90 may remember this, when you took the AP English test, the essay question, Brian, I don't know if you got it too, was the more things change, the more they stay the same, and you had to write your little, I still remember that phrase from that stupid test in high school. But I do think that there's some things that are always the same about campaigns, but this year we've got something that's very, very different. Now, I think I've lived through with both of these individuals, more Jeff than Brian, but a tied presidential election in Florida, 9/11, and now we've got a pandemic. So anytime in a history class when you say this is always the way presidential campaigns go, or this is always the way history goes, I have to say that even in my relatively short lifetime, I've had 3 things happen that nobody ever thought would happen ever in the history of mankind. And the good news for everybody is that we've survived it as a country and moved on. But let's talk a little bit more about this. So Brian and Jeff, like COVID-19 has kind of obviously changed the trajectory of what we think a normal campaign would be like. How is this different than things that you've seen before? And one other thing I do want to say, because I wrote it down, I forgot to mention it. I do want to say that Jeff Zeleny is also a Pulitzer Prize winner. So I'm very impressed by that. I just found that out in your bio. So I will be dropping that at every cocktail party I go to, if I ever get to go to one again. But go ahead, either one of you, grab that question.
I'll jump in first. I mean, look, I think from a practical perspective, and Jeff, and you guys both know this from all of your work, campaigns are so event driven, right? What is the event that you're doing on any given day? What's the backdrop? What's the location? Who are you meeting with? Who are the individuals who are up on stage, right? That conveys so much about a campaign. Obviously, there's been a lot of coverage, and Jeff knows this better than anybody. President Trump derives a lot of energy from his campaign rallies. The number of people is always a metric for, is the public into this individual? It happened with President Obama. It happened with Bernie Sanders' campaign. When no one shows up at your campaign rallies, that also sometimes is a mark of trouble. And that's all gone, right? So now it's how do you break through in this environment? How do you talk about the 2 issues that are, it's COVID and it's the economy, really? Do you know what I mean? And then how do you try to break through and get your message out? So I think it's fundamentally changed the way we communicate, and and you can see it's been a challenge, I think, for both of these, for both President Trump and for Joe Biden.
What do you think, Jeff?
I think you're right, Brian. I mean, in many respects, it's magnified some of the things that were already going on. But I think, just if you step back on this past Sunday, so just like 4 days ago, was the 6-month mark till the election. So, for several weeks, as we're all kind of frozen in time, they're like, oh, the campaign's on hold. And the campaign's not on hold. The campaign is playing out right in front of our eyes every moment of the day in very different ways, but it is absolutely not on hold. It is going on, and we'll find out at the end of the day here how smart some of the analysis is. We're sort of out of the prediction business, as we should be. We shouldn't have been in the prediction business in the first place, but we don't know how this is going to play, quite frankly. We don't know if it is better for Joe Biden that he's not out there every day with his crowds being compared to the president's crowds. We know the president can get a huge rally. Joe Biden, does not get the rallies that Bernie Sanders got. I think one thing for Joe Biden, it helped him close down the primary campaign much earlier. I do believe that if this pandemic was not happening, there would still be an active Democratic primary. Bernie Sanders would have had an avenue to make his case, and drawing some huge rallies across the country. So in that respect, I think it was helpful to Joe Biden. I think in one other respect, it probably was too, because it really shined a light on one of his biggest strengths, he believes, is his governing experience and his leadership abilities. But again, for anyone who says, they know how this is going to play out and they know what the outcome is in November, we have no idea. We actually don't even know if the election is going to turn on this. We think it will. We think at this moment it will be on the economy and coronavirus, but God forbid there be an attack or something. So, we just never know what a campaign is going to end on. but boy, this was a disruptive in every single way. But one thing we know, it's going forward regardless. It's not on hold.
That's actually really interesting. I would agree with that. I mean, the president is clearly wanting to get out, but I think one trick I want to offer all of our viewers to start to look at is when Biden goes out and now as Trump goes out, take a look at where they're going, because they're actually going to places, and the president has been doing this kind of unabashedly, and the political consultant in me says brilliantly, and the sort of a regular citizen says, what the heck? But he goes to battleground states. He goes to places where the political media moment is. He went to the primary states when the Democrats were in the middle of their primaries to try to stop the traffic and get attention. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen a president this skilled at, and it's the wrong word to use because I don't think you get manipulated, Jeff, but to be able to figure out how to get press and stay in the press. So what do you guys think that's sort of like, what other tricks does Trump have in his sleeves? And also, how much Trump on TV is good, and when does it start getting to be bad again, too? I mean, thanks to these coronavirus briefings, I mean, I think the Biden campaign and Bill Kristol have enough to do probably ads until 2050 based on just the sound bites that they can get out of those things. So what do you guys, Jeff, what do you think, like how is Trump going to be able to figure out how to media master this moment?
We'll see. I mean, I think one thing has changed pretty dramatically. He's not doing these daily briefings anymore. We'll see how long he'll be able to sort of stop doing that, because he does like attention. And he loves to be at the center of all this. One thing, interestingly, today, his campaign, just a couple hours ago, unveiled a new $10 million advertising buy, really going aggressively hard after Biden on China. They are right now, that sound you hear out there is them trying to change the subject and trying to will this coronavirus challenge and crisis to be over. Of course, it's not over. The biggest reminder will come tomorrow morning when the unemployment number comes out at 8:30. So, but I do think that the president is very skilled, as you said, in manipulating or mastering the moment here. But he's not the only president to travel to swing states. That's pretty standard. But like yesterday or a couple days ago, he was in Arizona. Like, that is a new swing state. That's a new battleground. So I do think that he'll be campaigning. I was actually checking with some Biden people, like, what's their thinking? When is he going to leave the basement? And there's still a stay-at-home order in Delaware until May 15th. So he actually is sort of like bound by that. But after that, I think you're going to see him out there a little bit more. But does it matter? I don't know. I mean, like, this is the new normal. Like, this is the medium. So it'll be fascinating to watch. But those new campaign ads from Trump, interesting.
Brian, do you have a reaction to that? I have a question off Jeff's comment there, but do you have a reaction to the earlier question?
Yeah, I mean, look, Trump's unique, right? I mean, he has like a PhD.
Like, this is the new normal. Like, this is the medium. So it'll be fascinating.
Oh, Jeff, you just repeated yourself. That was exciting.
Without even opening your mouth. That was kind of.
I know, that was amazing. Go ahead, Brian.
No, I was just going to say, look, Trump is so unique in American politics. I mean, I think getting that PhD that he does in marketing and communications, he grew up in the New York media market, dealing with tabloids every single day, right? So he's been dealing with the Twitter world, basically trying to communicate on the front page of the Daily News or the Post for 30, 40 years. Do you know what I mean? So I think he's unique at this. So he understands these things. And I think it drives a lot of people nuts, including, people who kind of view themselves more as that, centrist Republican. But, to the point that Jeff was making and you were making, Jenny, it's effective. You know what I mean? And I think he will find a way to get his message out, and he will make mistakes, but he's never going to throttle back. Right. And I also think, too, just one other thought on this, I think for him, so much of this, too, is making sure that his core supporters stay engaged, because, that's critical for him. I think that's his lifeblood. If he's got his base kind of with him, and I think they are, that's powerful for him going forward. I'm sorry, my light's on a timer. I have to rejigger it here.
Well, while he's doing that, Jeff, I want to talk a little bit about the media to you. So, I mean, there's been a change in, and you just sort of triggered this in my head when you were talking about TV buys. So there used to be the power of Bob Shrum when I was doing the Gore campaign and the Kerry campaign, and the TV guys and Bill Knapp and all these great TV ad makers, and they had a lot of power of the campaign. And then by the time you got to like the Obama campaign and the McCain campaign, the internet started rising. Now you have video on the internet, and you can buy video ads on the internet, but the TV, the power of the TV buy seemed to have somewhat lessened as sort of society changed. And now you have media changing. There's a great Springsteen song, 57 channels and nothing on, which kind of, again, dates me because there's probably 5,700 channels and nothing on. But people are watching TV in a much different way now through taping or Hulu or on demand. So are we going to see a resurgence of the TV, the big TV buy, like you just said, as a way to try to get your message out? Are TV ads going to be strangely much more important because we're all trapped watching TV? Or are people not even watching anything where you would see a national TV buy?
I think they're still important. I mean, I think with each passing cycle that we've watched and covered and voted in, it's, certainly the dominance of television has diminished some, but it is one important piece of the pie. And, we are seeing people now watching a lot of television. You see the ratings on the evening news, the highest that they've been in years, and it also drives a lot of coverage, but there's no question. I mean, it is just one piece of the puzzle. I mean, the bigger thing is, a paid TV ad drives so much coverage, much more so than just like a viral thing or a digital ad. But that might be more important. So it depends. But for Trump's voters, a lot of his voters are more likely to be traditional television viewers. So I think it sets the agenda, and I think it is important. But it's not the be all and end all. I remember a couple cycles ago, I'm trying to think when it changed, maybe, I think it's still in '08, the Obama campaign, they called it the new media department.
Yes.
I was like sat over here. It's not new media now. I mean, it's just like media. I mean, they probably should have an old media department, I guess. There should be a television. So it's one piece of the puzzle, but amazingly, those television advertising consultants, many of whom are friends of the three of ours, have done very well over the years, and they still get a pretty good slice of these ad buys, because it is still important, because millions and millions of people watch television.
Go ahead, Brian, if you want to react to that. But the other question I want you both to think about is, you just talked about older voters, and there's lots of talk right now about who's the soccer moms. Again, we're dating ourselves here with our. But, in it, ironically, actually could be the grandma voters or the grandpa voters or the seniors. There's Ron Brownstein, who's a French file of ours, has been writing some really interesting pieces about the importance of older voters in this cycle. And they have been loyal to Trump for a very, very long time. Do you guys agree with that assessment? How do you think that's going to impact how the campaign plays itself out? And how do you think that also helps and hurts these two actually quite older presidential candidates? In some ways, for many people watching this from the class of 2020, this election is very far from the experiences that those two gentlemen are talking about on the stage. And I was often struck by this when Bernie and Biden were on the stage too. Their experiences were far different from many of their voters and people watching. So it's kind of interesting. So I gave you a lot of questions there. So Brian, jump into any part of that.
Yeah, no, I did. Well, so two quick thoughts. One is, it is interesting, particularly someone having worked for McCain, and when McCain, both in the primary and then in the general election, '08, was kind of viewed as, one of his challenges was that he was old, right? Going against this kind of post-racial, once in a generation candidate who was, however old Obama was at that point, 47, 48 years old. And the contrast was just really, it was hard. You know what I mean? It was hard to overcome. And I think ultimately it's what drove him to obviously choose Sarah Palin as his running mate. But, your analysis is interesting, Jenny. And you have to think on some level, obviously Trump is making this bet right now that we need to just kind of pretend like maybe the coronavirus isn't as bad as we think it is, or it is, you know what I mean? To try to hey, if I just push forward on this like I've done in other things, perhaps I'll kind of get my way from a messaging perspective. Obviously, the risk here is great, because if it doesn't work, right, you are going to see people who are older voters get coronavirus, and the result is not going to be good. And I think that among that age cohort, if it's really a huge risk, because eventually it could be the kind of thing where that could turn the tide against him. And I think there already is some erosion that you're beginning to see in some of the polls.
Is that what you're seeing too, Jeff, at CNN?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Ron has been writing very good. I would say Ron Brownstein, who's an analyst at CNN, but also works for The Atlantic, probably one of the best thinkers of demographics, like how different demographics sets are voting. And one thing about old voters is they're pretty reliable folks. They vote.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, that is a problem for the president if he is losing some of his old voters. Younger voters, also are hugely important. They haven't voted as much, but one different dynamic now, I think, as we're sort of we're always comparing to the last campaign, which I think we all make a mistake in doing so because everything's different. Certainly the pandemic is different, we'd have to go back to the midterms of 1918, which even the three of us weren't around for that. So, but I do think the one thing that is dramatically different that drives everything that wasn't there in 2016 is President Donald J. Trump. I mean, Donald Trump 4 years ago was an idea. It was an intriguing idea to so many people, but his record and just the fact that he is president drives everything. It excites his base without question. It infuriates Democrats.
And excites our base.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that one of the sort of like the theories of the case here is the Trump campaign believes that there are first-time voters that are open to them as well, that are sort of forgotten people who have never necessarily voted as much, but they have been drawn to President Trump. They're against this elite Washington class. So it's really fascinating. This we'll probably talk about the battlegrounds, but there are 6 states to watch. I mean, 3 of the ones that Hillary Clinton lost, obviously, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I mean, we'll see, so much discussed there. But the Trump campaign believes that there are voters there who, will come out and vote for him who may not have voted before. We'll see. I mean, it's a big question, and Joe Biden is not Hillary Clinton. So this 2020 election really has very little to do with 2016, I think, in terms of the map. We always have to begin where we left off here, but it's so dramatically different. In many ways, it's painting a new canvas here. And the Trump re-election campaign has a lot of money to do it. So that's, I'd say, their biggest advantage is the money that they have to do this. And they have, a lot of disadvantages, obviously.
Now, just to add on to those other 3 states, and maybe Brian and Jeff, we can talk a little bit about, so maybe each of you can tell me which is the one state you're going to be watching for the campaigns on both sides. But there's 6 states. Jeff mentioned the sort of Rust Belt states, Pennsylvania and Michigan, which I've heard on the Dem side, people feel are better chances. They're not taking them for granted, but are a little bit better for us. Wisconsin being a true toss-up, people are saying. And then there's what I would call sort of the sunny states, Arizona, North Carolina, and then the big mythical whale it's the Moby Dick of all presidential states, Florida, out there floating. And again, Jeff and I and Brian have spent a lot of time in that state for different reasons, and it's definitely swung back and forth. But I have heard some people, and some of it is spin. Always the campaigns will be like, "Oh, we're going to put Texas on the map," but it is a little bit of a spin. And as I've heard Pluff say, it's like a 9-digit decision for a campaign, to go back to Jeff's money point. And it's, I would say, probably the president's home state too these days. But it's Florida +1 or 3 states for the Dems to get to 270. What are the states that you're going to watch? I'm not going to watch Florida. I actually think that Arizona is an interesting state to watch, and Wisconsin. Those are probably the 2 that I'm most interested in. But Brian, what do you think?
No, to me, Pennsylvania is interesting. Obviously Biden's from there originally. It's a state where at one point you had a lot of conservative Democrats, kind of, pro-union, pro-life Democrats. I have family who fit that bill from kind of coal region Pennsylvania, but they banked hard to Trump. I think he that's it was, President Obama talked about people clinging to their guns and their religion. I think CNN actually went to the town that my parents are from in Pennsylvania to talk to some people at that point who were clinging to their guns and their religion. But it's just my small focus groups of my families. I definitely see some fissures right now, you know what I mean, on the Trump front, where people are starting to kind of, it's hard, I think, when you're watching some of this occurring. We were talking before with some of the briefings. I mean, it's, when you're getting into, aspirating your lungs with Lysol and Clorox and UV rays. I mean, even the most hardened supporter doesn't sit there and scratch their head a little bit. You know what I mean? So anyway, Pennsylvania is a state that I'm going to watch. I just think it's an interesting state. It's also an old state. So the point we're making before about age of voters, I mean, I think maybe after Florida, it's the oldest state, or maybe it is the oldest state. It's right in that zone. So I think that's one I'll definitely be keeping an eye on.
Jeff, any other thoughts on the map?
I mean, I think I'm with you on Arizona. Arizona is, there's a reason that the president went there on Wednesday. He could have found a mask factory anywhere. Certainly didn't have to fly all the way across America. So Arizona, without question, is, and it also has a very competitive Senate race. So playing out at the same time as this presidential campaign, obviously, is the race for the fight for control of the Senate. So that's what makes it worth the investment on both sides, try and hold out. But I think, Florida, you have to play there. I still think it's a tough state for Democrats to win. And in North Carolina is super interesting. Obviously, President Obama won it in 2008. He narrowly lost it in 2012. Then we're going to hear a lot about Texas and Georgia and other things. If Democrats are actually competing there, and if Republicans actually are spending money, and if they're concerned, well, then that's a big problem for the president, because I think Texas eventually may change demographically speaking, but I don't think in this campaign. And then we'll keep an eye on, the old states like Ohio and Iowa. Ohio particularly, if the Trump campaign believes that they really must spend a lot of money to fight for Ohio, that is a sign of trouble for them as well. Yeah.
No, I think I think you brought up some really interesting points. Actually, I want to quickly go, before we take questions from folks, to just talk a little bit about parties, the political parties, and also the other races. We saw in the midterms actually some, sort of the boost for the House with a bunch of new candidates. We haven't even been able to talk about women voters yet, but hopefully that will come up in the questions. But I kind of think, and I don't know what you guys agree or not, like, sometimes elections are all about Republicans versus Democrats, or like Reagan redefining the Republican Party. I mean, Democrats haven't always done that. Democrats tend to run away from the Democratic label. But to me, I don't think this election is really going to be about Republicans and Democrats. I do think it's going to be about Democrats trying to convince Republicans who are a little turned off by the president, whether it's impeachment or bleach or whatever, to try to come over. And I actually personally think the best ads out there against the president right now are coming from Republicans. So I do think there's sort of a quiet majority out there of people that will never tell a pollster they're going to vote for a Democrat. But I don't really think this is more of an election about one person, Donald Trump, and not even really about Joe Biden either. I mean, I think at least that's what it feels like right now. And then Ron Brownstein, to go back to this, or David Broder, if he was still with us today, would still be telling us all to think about the economy too. And the right track, wrong track it's really an election about voters. But I don't know, what do you guys think about those random thoughts I just threw at you? Brian, you want to
go? Sure. No, I'll start. I mean, look, I think, I was looking at some numbers this week on one of our clients, and they were talking about the most important issue to people. And it's interesting. It was the economy. I mean, you look at the number of people who have been impacted with job loss, and it's a lot higher than the number of people who have the coronavirus. It's a practical matter, right? So I think the economy really continues to animate this discussion. And I think if you look at the numbers, I think Biden has an advantage. I think the one danger area for Democrats, I feel like, is if all of a sudden at some point this becomes a conversation about, and again, it's very tricky, and obviously there's many landmines, and Jeff brought up the good point before that anything could kind of still happen. But if all of a sudden it's like, hey, Trump's the guy who wants to get the economy going, and Democrats are holding back the economy, and you've got the economy as the number one issue, and you've got kind of the for lack of a better term, the coastal elite saying no, that to me is a dangerous recipe potentially for the Democrats, and I think it's going to be an interesting line to see them walk, because I think we know which way Trump's going. Do you know what I mean? But I think for the Democrats, it might be a little more difficult.
I think you're spot on about that, and it's playing out in Michigan. I think prime example for that. Probably Wisconsin as well. Both have Democratic governors. Obviously, 2018, was very strong for Democrats. Which is usually what happens. The president, his party usually does very poorly in his first midterm election a year. But George W. Bush being the one exception in the last really 20 years after 9/11. Mm-hmm. But I think Michigan playing that out is absolutely interesting. I mean, if, the incumbent president usually bears the blame for economic problems or shortcomings, but we don't know that that will necessarily be as true in the age of Trump or in the age of a pandemic. He is trying to get, the economy going, and also blame all of this on China and blame all of this on other things. So, he's an amazing Teflon candidate. I think the challenges facing him will be a test even for his abilities to do that now. But there's no question the economy and how people actually feel about it will drive this race. We don't know
actually
who they'll pay for it, though.
Sorry, Jeff. I actually was struck by a conversation that we were just having, the three of us, with Ed and Ellen before everyone got on, which is, I think the thing, Brian, that will protect the Democrats, or is protecting the Democrats right now, in terms of this, Republicans are for an open government and Democrats are for COVID sheltering or whatever, or holding us back, is some Republican governors. People like Mike DeWine, Larry Hogan here in the DC area in Maryland, my home state of Vermont, Scott. I mean, there definitely are some Republican, Baker to some extent in Massachusetts. I mean, some of them are New England governors who are Republican and sort of not Trump Republicans. They're Republicans, but not Trump Republicans. But I mean, there has been a sort of a fighting COVID bipartisanism that's out there. I know, Jeff, you were just out there, and I know that DeWine's under a lot of pressure, but right now I think we're I think this is sort of hasn't blown into a totally partisan thing yet, based on the reality, based on what we're seeing on the state level, sort of the state versus federal fight versus a Republican versus Democratic fight.
I think that's right. I mean, if you look at national polling, I mean, there's still a pretty wide majority of people who want this to go slow, people of both sides, both parties. So I think we'll have to see where we are a couple months from now. There's just a million things we can't even factor in. Is there going to be a resurgence by the fall? One thing I think that will be different about the campaign, we are going to see a very different election day. Vote by mail is going to be a central issue. The president is very opposed to voting by mail, as he has repeatedly said, but that is going to be an argument. We always talk about the mechanics of the election and then we kind of forget about it. I think it actually is going to be sort of central to this. And it means we're not 6 months from election day. We're actually probably 5 months from election day, or 4 months and some change from election day. So that, I think, just the mechanics of how this election is conducted also, I think, could influence some things this year.
And once again, I think we're going to see the specter of the courts playing a role too. I mean, we saw it a little bit, again, we all worked on an election where the Florida Supreme Court and the US Supreme Court picked a winner and a loser in some of our eyes, in those races. But yet then sometimes some of these court rulings turn out to be not the victory that they expected. We had the US Supreme Court step into the Michigan primary, which I think actually also generated some of the most iconic and heartbreaking photos that we've seen during this political cycle of people trying to go out and vote with hazmat suits on. And then the Supreme Court ruling that said that they couldn't extend election day, but actually that Supreme Court ruling also moved up the day. Your ballot can now be postmarked on election day if you're returning it. And that was actually a better standard than we were seeing in many of the states. And the Democrats are now using that Supreme Court ruling to go fight in, there's about 16 or 17 sort of hot cases right now on the state level, or in federal courts are getting headed towards federal courts where the right to vote or how you vote or who gets to vote is up. And I do think we'll see more legal action.
Sure.
Ed, I see you.
Jenny,
do you want to?
Yeah, I hesitate to interrupt this conversation. It's so interesting, but there are questions coming in from the audience. So let me read a couple of those to you. So the first question has to do with the media, and the questioner asks, how do you think the media handled misinformation during COVID-19? Do you think any part of the media's strategy it accounts for the virus becoming a pandemic?
I guess I'll take a go at that. I don't know if it accounts for the pandemic. I think that misinformation is obviously something that is a fact of life, and I think more so than in any other time. The two of my least favorite words ever, I find them vulgar, are fake news, because I think they're dangerous, actually, and just the kind of an oxymoron in some respects as well. But I think the misinformation campaign has been, pretty wide on this and pretty extensive on this. And I think that one thing that's sort of striking, don't listen to us in the media if you're not inclined to do so. Just find the information out yourself. And it is a fact that testing has been just to use that as an example, has been a massive challenge. So it is just sort of striking when you hear one thing from the White House, and then you hear some of the president's own supporters, but certainly Republican governors and others saying, well, actually, we can't get these reagents for tests. So there's a ton of misinformation, I think, going back to the beginning of this. And I assume that we will replay the history of, how this was covered, and how this started, how it was diminished, for a long time. I think the media probably, knowing what we know now, would have shined a light on this a little bit sooner. But in some respects, we are covering what's happening, and the Chinese government obviously was not forthcoming. The U.S. government was obviously not forthcoming in real time. But I think what we can do now is try and be as fact-based in real time, have as many experts on as possible. And one thing that I've been sort of struck by, the leadership at my network, and I know really talking to people at the Times and other things, this is a public health story. This is still a public health story. It's a public health crisis. It's not a political story at this moment. Yes, there are some political, strains to it, and it's going to become a part of the campaign. But it's first and foremost, I think, a public health story, which I think it's how we've been covering it, which is why Dr. Sanjay Gupta on CNN is on, more than any other human being. He almost cloned himself, I think. He's been on more than any other human being. It's a public health story. More than a political story.
I want to quickly add to that, because I was the comms director during H1N1, which was the last sort of, we didn't really have Ebola in the US, but it was the last US-based pandemic or threat of a pandemic. And I have to say that the media was one of our biggest, allies or assets, because it is a public health story about a national issue that impacts people. And so if you work with the media and you give them accurate science-based facts, then actually the media can help you stop the pandemic or convince, in our case, we were trying to convince, we aren't even here yet with COVID, but we were trying to convince people to give their kids and themselves a vaccine that we just sort of rushed out in order to stop this very, very bad strain of the flu. And I remember we did a briefing with Dr. Rich Besser, who is a pediatrician and an emergency specialist in the White House. We had lots of reporters there asking, would you give your own kid the vaccine? And really the media really forced us to answer questions and put information out, and got information out for us. We worked with Sesame Street to have everyone see how to sneeze with Elmo. So I do think if the media is given helpful information, I would, even in this instance, I think it's been very hard, but they've really kept the focus, I think, on health and safety. And it was kind of amazing that the media and Republicans and Democrats all had to send out, and the manufacturers of Lysol and Clorox had to send out a tweet after the president did that briefing. I do think what has happened is the briefing or the framing of the information, there's been an attempt to try to control it and get it out. And I guess that's the only other thing I would say about Trump. I'll go back to the questions, but Trump, there is not a norm that Trump will just not blow through. And that can really help him in some ways. It makes him really flexible and sort of exciting in a weird way to watch. But I never thought during impeachment that the Republicans would stay with him, and they did. And I never thought that you could attack a doctor on air and still be standing. And he did. There just doesn't seem he just honestly does not care about the truth. And so it's really hard to figure out, like, how do you fight that, or how do you get at that?
Great. We have a question from Judy Kramer, Brown class of 1990, and she
Hi,
says
Judy.
a special hi to Jenny. So Judy asks, as a longtime voter by mail in Florida, I'd appreciate your thoughts on how to avoid another hanging Chad incident in 2020. And maybe I'll just add, what does the whole shift to vote by mail mean for voting security, voting accuracy? How's that likely going to play out?
I think you don't, I mean, go ahead, Brian, but I would say all you have to do is look at Oregon and Washington, who've been doing this for a long time. I think the problem is that people are going to have to scale very quickly. But in some senses, there will be more information and tracking about where ballots go and how they get there. I think some of the bigger questions, and I don't know as much, maybe Jeff and Brian do, on the security of the voting machines. The machines that count mail-in ballots are generally, I think, slightly more safe than those touchscreen things that you hit when you go in. But I don't know enough about that to look at it. But I do think, I just voted by mail for the DC primary, and I had some of those same worries that Judy was talking about, but I actually think that the other thing that's going to happen on this vote by mail is that all of us are going to get a lot more junk mail. I have to say my US postal thing was like about as high as like where my hand is right now from the table. With just people, there's going to be, it's like the rise of the TV guys, but the direct mail people are also going to do quite well in the political consulting class. I don't know, Brian, what do you think?
No, other states have done it. It's worked, right? So there's a model for it. I think you have to be transparent about it. You have to be clear about it in terms of how it's going to work. I think it does. I think Jeff kind of hit on this earlier. It disrupts the way that campaigns have traditionally worked in terms of the flow of information. You know what I mean? And it changes how you might target voters, right? And certainly for people who come from like the TV wing, do you know what I mean? I think that also kind of impacts them to a certain extent. So I think it's disruptive. However, it's going to be necessary. And it does seem like, even though President Trump is not a fan, it seems like there's enough movement within both parties that's where we're headed.
Do you think so, Jeff? Is that what you're seeing on the ground in the States?
I think that's right. And I think it kind of depends like what the fall looks like. Someone made this analogy. If college football fans are in stadiums, maybe we'll have normal elections. If they're not, maybe we won't. And I think that's probably as good of a benchmark as any. And I think, if you talk to a lot of university officials, I think it's pretty unlikely that the fall is going to look like a normal fall campaign season. So I think in one respect, this is going to look, at least it's going to feel more like a British election. I think it's going to, from Labor Day to Election Day is going to be more of a sprint in terms of like when people are paying attention. But I still think, I'm pretty confident in saying more people will vote by mail in this election cycle than ever before. A lot of Republican governors in certain states are supportive of it. We'll see how much that changes. The president and some of his allies have a very strong ability to change views and minds about this.
And he just appointed his top RNC donor as the Postmaster General too, right? Did that just happen?
And that's one of the big things. Vote by mail, Democrats will say that there has to be funding for it. There has to be, you have to be able to send in your ballots without postage. So, there's a lot of, but we're a big country. We do a lot of big things. So I think that, I do think this will be a fight. I think it's kind of a disingenuous one in some respects. Both sides can master, finding their voters through vote by mail. They have, both parties know more about their voters, what they read, what they eat, what they watch on TV than ever before. I do not think that this should be a barrier to voting.
I have another question from Hamad Sarfaz. Before I read it, let me remind everybody in the audience, please ask your questions either on the chat box, or if you're on YouTube, you can write your questions down and they'll get to me and I'll pass them to the panel. So back to the question from Hamad Sarfaz. Hamad asks generally what domestic and foreign policy topics really will dominate in this election. I know you've spoken, now I'm speaking, you've all spoken to some of those issues, but maybe I could just elaborate and ask, to what extent are we really going to be talking about governance issues. That seems to be the discussion at the state level, which governors are really governing effectively, which not. So how much of the election is going to be about governance and policy, and how much is rage and emotion?
I think more the latter than the former in this respect. I mean, if you look at both sides, how they're framing this, I mean, Joe Biden's campaign is built around restoring, the soul of the nation. And I think that, most incumbent elections, it's a referendum on the incumbent. Of course, the Trump campaign is, not unique in this. They are trying to make it a choice. I think that this election is most, again, I'm going to violate one of my own rules in terms of comparing it to one, but I think it is much more like the '04 campaign when there is, an incumbent president running for a re-election here. It's different in many ways, but I don't think that this is going to be an election that's going to be deeply about a lot of other things other than like leadership and, sort of restoring order. But China is going to play a very big role in this election. I'm not exactly sure what the role is, but the Trump campaign, that ad I was talking about earlier, the $10 million spot going after Biden, is all about his relationship with China and President Xi. So I'm not sure that that's really going to turn voters, but I think it will be, for one thing. But if it's a safety, security, both national security, I guess, health security, economic security election, the Trump record is a difficult one to argue. But I think Biden has to, still prosecute the case in any other way that he would. So I do think that this will be, I think on rage somewhat, but a little bit more than that because there's so much more at stake.
Just one other quick thought to add, and Jeff made me think of it in the '04 election. Ken Mehlman, who was President Bush's campaign manager, used to talk about how in campaigns you have one candidate or campaign that's usually like the center of a solar system. It's like the sun, and the other is orbiting around it. And in that situation, Kerry was doing more of the orbiting around Bush, and I do think the incumbent has that, starts from that position, right? And I think Trump has that now too, right? So I think he'll define a lot of the parameters of the race. And it's going to be up to Biden to not just become a caricature of himself. Do you know what I mean? Like, no offense, Jenny, I know, but Kerry he was for it before he was against it. Do you know what I mean? It was like, which way does the wind blow? And again, that's what you kind of remember about that campaign. And I think, for better or for worse, that's kind of how it got framed to a certain extent. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how the Biden campaign tries to punch through, right? And how do they work to get their messages out? And what are those issues where they can kind of begin to, chip away at that orbiting at the center of that solar system?
Well, I'm going to take your metaphor a little further, though. I think the difference this time is that Trump is like a vortex or a black hole, or at least that's the argument that Biden's going to try to prosecute, is that the entire universe will be sucked into oblivion if this kind of chaos monster gets to sort of stay out there. And I do think, for me, the theme of this election, if I got to define it, would be chaos versus calm. I mean, even my Republican friends, some of my Republican relatives, are tired of the craziness that just seems to be coming out of Washington and the lack of stability. And that's never more evident than in a pandemic. But to go to Hamid's question, in where I think there is going to be like an issue that will be framed in style points, it is definitely, I'll go to figure skating metaphors now. The Russian judges and the Chinese judges are going to be important, like what the trolls are saying and doing, and how foreign powers come in and impact elections and don't impact elections, and who's best friends with more psychotic, crazy, to quote Bush, axis of evil leaders or not. Like that conversation I don't necessarily think is going to be right for Trump, but Trump is doing something that he does really well, which is to define an enemy, an other. It was immigrants and people that are not white, sort of in his last election and subtext through the first part of his presidency. I think healthcare and health security is still going to be relevant in a pandemic because the weaknesses and the strengths of our healthcare system have been exposed in COVID. The incredible individuals that work there, but the fact we don't have a lot of them, the incredible life-saving science that can happen to try to get us, much of it driven by brown scientists, go brown, but the science that's happening out there, I mean, the possibility of America is also like in this COVID, but whether or not we can sort of realize it and take care of our country and get a vaccine built and done and out the door so we can all go back and watch football games or soccer games, you know, I don't know. That's the other thing. I do think health and health security and sort of who are your best friends on the international stage is going to be an issue that both campaigns are going to have to address.
Great. We have a question from Vanshika Gupta, who writes, what about female voters? Who are they likely to vote for?
I think that Trump has a really big problem with women voters. And I think once Biden picks his female running mate, the dream that many of us have had of a woman president someday is going to be very much closer to reality. Although, you know, we had Sarah Palin with, I don't think that Biden will have a Palin-like pick. It's hard to reach that level. Sorry, Brian. But I think that female voters to me are, we were under sort of women and the power of women in politics has, I've become much more vocal about this. I used to be more of a cynical political operative, but I truly, honestly think that sort of what we are sort of underwritten in presidential elections. We've got what Nancy Pelosi did in the midterms and the incredible candidates that she helped recruit. I think that's something that Trump will, if he forgets that or mocks that, it's at his peril. And if you look at the demographics, we have picked up white educated college women back towards Democrats. The best, most amazing, loyal Democrats are African-American and women of color. We hopefully will not take them for granted anymore, but we have them solidly. We've picked up white college educated women. We're starting to make some inroads into non-college educated white women. And if we can do that, then that's going to help move the votes towards us. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think if 2018 is any, any sign, and just think what has happened in 2016, just culturally. I mean, there's been just like a dramatic change. That this really will be the first presidential election to bring together, the Me Too movement and bring together, the fact that again, President Donald Trump is the incumbent president. That has the effect of just animating and exciting many voters. Now on the Trump side, they have a Women for Trump organization, and they believe that they can find first-time women voters who do, support him. And I've spent a lot of time at Trump rallies as well over the last, 4+ years. And there are a lot of women at those rallies, but there are more not at the rallies. So I think the idea that there's absolutely, it's true that women will decide the election. The challenge for Democrats is, and I think this will be interesting to Biden, who he chooses, as Jenny just said, if Democrats can eat into the non-college educated women, that will be a big problem for the Trump campaign. So who do you get to do that? That is something I think that he's certainly thinking about. And African-American women, of course, and women of color overall. So I think without question, it is an animating force of this in ways that we haven't seen.
Yeah, I just jump in and say a huge opportunity for Joe Biden when he picks his vice presidential candidate. I will say, though, it does feel like over the years that there's the conversation around who the VP is going to be is often more exciting and engaging than the actual VP in action, you know what I mean, on the campaign trail, right? It's like almost like there's this crescendo, and then it's like, oh, okay, all right, well, I mean, ultimately the campaign is going to be about Joe Biden's ability to, execute, I think, you know what I mean? And I think if he can execute, he's got a really good chance to win, despite who he picks as his VP. Now, obviously, that'll be I think there could be a lot of energy behind that. That candidate vis-a-vis Mike Pence could be extremely interesting. But ultimately, it's going to be about Joe Biden vis-a-vis Trump.
In that decision by Biden, what's the risk, or how do we think about the way that the gender issue becomes potentially racialized? So the picking of a female vice presidential candidate, does it become racialized, white female versus African-American, female? It feels like that's how the discourse is heading.
I don't think so. I think the way that I've done several vice presidential rollouts, and I've seen them done well and not well. And actually, some of the ones that we did great rollouts, the people turned out to not be such great people on the other side when we did the Edwards rollout, but we did a really good rollout. I think what we're going to look for with Biden needs to do three things with the VP pick. He has to pick someone that he's comfortable with. I've heard smart people in our party say he should pick someone, and he's actually said it. We had a alumni, Biden-Obama alumni thing. He said to us, someone asked him this question, or it sort of came up, and he's like, I also complimentary. He felt that he was very complimentary. He had complementary skills to Obama's skills, and that's why they were so successful, because they each did things well. I do think that Joe Biden Joe Biden is beloved in the African-American community. He wouldn't be the nominee without him. I don't think I think he has seen that America can elect someone of color. I do think Trump is using it more. I'm not sure that that works, again, in the framing of this election. I think the last thing that Biden needs to do is get more effective voices out there that can, I call it picking the bear, poke the bear. He needs to have a vice president who can drive Trump crazy. And if you look at all of the people up there, each one of them has an ability to get under Trump's skin. Nancy Pelosi does this better than anybody, but she's not on the list. But, Warren, Kamala Harris, who I think is probably the most likely, Amy Klobuchar, Stacey Edwards, but all of them are sort of, that's why I would think the advantage is they've got to get more surrogates. Biden needs more surrogates. He needs to get more people out there that people like Jeff will cover on television, I think.
Great, thanks. We'll try to get in two more questions. So we have a question from Helen Steinberg, who asks, how do you see Trump's COVID leadership affect lower income voters that voted for Trump in 2016?
Jeff, have you seen anything like that yet when you're out there?
I mean, I think it is, a lot of those lower income voters are the core of his base. And I think that, we see, for so many times, Howard Dean, of course, from Jenny's home state of Vermont, I'm always, asked the question, people are voting against some people are voting against their economic self-interest. So that's not always why people vote. Like, people make value decisions on voting and other things. So I think that if you're with Trump and if you are a lower economic voter, and if you're part of his base, I think you're going to be with him. You believe what he is saying. And this is going to be an election that, where everyone is not seeing the same set of facts. And this is going to be an election where, I find it hard to believe, a true Trump voter who, might have purchased his merchandise, like a MAGA hat for Christmas or whatnot, or have gone to a rally, or anyone who's been engaged at all really is not going to vote for him. I think that they are going to vote for him. So I think that, the challenge is on, obviously, the Biden side. And I think he is he has an ability, unlike Hillary Clinton probably had in 2016, of really relating to a lot of working class voters here. But I think that, if you're a Trump supporter, regardless of your economic income group, I think you'll probably remain a Trump supporter at this point.
Yeah, just one other thing just to add in here to, as Jeff was saying, I think, the misinformation campaigns that we were talking about before, I think, they're targeting a lot of these individuals, and a lot of these individuals are like willing consumers of the information, pass it among themselves. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of this kind of bad feedback loop. So, just because information is out there that we on this conversation here might view as true or absolute doesn't mean that everyone necessarily views it that way. We could do a whole separate conversation around that, but I think it's a huge problem. And I do think for a lot of Trump voters, they're in that feedback loop.
Oh, Brian, it's funny you mentioned a whole separate conversation, because I'm going to read one last question, which is effectively right on that same theme. So I'm going to ask you all of you in the last 2 minutes to try to respond to this question. This comes from Arjun, who's a Brown alum, class of 2015. And Arjun writes, how does the media balance reporting news from the White House while also ensuring that viewers receive factual information, especially where objectively, there really aren't two sides to the story. And I'll say, I'm just reading the New York Times. For me, there are times I feel, okay, they're just now giving me the facts, but this feels like really a kind of a partisan thing about Trump. And sometimes that line is really confusing between covering the White House versus just providing the facts. How does the media deal with that?
I think you're right. I think, never have we seen the word lied in a headline, in the New York Times or on television. It's just not something that was ever done before, because like that, suggests a motive to this. But we are, almost 4 years into this, and we do know that the president misstates the truth repeatedly and willfully. So one thing that we do, I think that we will be better about this than 4 years ago. You can see it now. We don't air all of this news conferences live. It took a long time to get to that point. A lot more fact checking, no question. A lot more like, this is true, that's true. When I was covering the White House for the first, 2.5 years, never did I think I'd be standing on the North Lawn. You really feel like a referee in real time. That's true, that's not true, that's definitely not true, that might be true. It is really, so I think it's incumbent on, consumers of news and voters to, have a little skin in the game and do some work on this on yourselves. You can find out what's true and not. We've never had more access to more information. So I think the fact checking sort of business, if you will, is hugely important, and there's a lot of places to go for fact checking. So I think we do it in real time, but I too sometimes get uncomfortable, when we go overboard and say like everything's a crisis and everything's a lie and whatnot, because I think that is also just sort of goes against the grain of what sounds normal and presidential. But I do think that we try as good as we can to fact check. Certainly not. We're not always successful in doing so. It's sort of impossible to keep up out of the fire hose, frankly.
Great. Brian, Jenny, last words?
Well, I think Jeff answered that really well. I was actually going to try to steal the mic back and ask one last question to these guys and actually do a tribute to Brown. First of all, those were amazing questions, and really it just makes you think about like what an interesting time we are, and how lucky we are to have a media and a free press that can report. I want to take it back and throw out a tribute to a fellow Brown alum, John Krasinski, who I think is actually doing something which is really interesting to watch. And I'm going to actually sort of the age of the Jerry Lewis telethon, I think Krasinski's doing a great show, Some Good News. And I want to ask Brian and Jeff what they think is one piece of good news that's going to come out of the 2020 election, if it's a trend and also just a huge shout out to John. That show is like a highlight of my week. I never watch TV on YouTube, and I watch it each week. It reminds me of all that's good about America. But just quickly, I want to say something about that format, which is that President Obama and Michelle Obama are doing a national commencement, which is going to be aired on all the networks, and we've seen concerts. I do think we're going to see, because that was Arjun, that was a really smart question about like kind of what media is. I do think we're going to see new formats and stuff come out in this election cycle, especially if people are trapped in their houses, and like maybe more national moments using media or the internet to sort of bring people together, kind of like we're doing now. So I think, and Krasinski's show is actually a good example of something that they're doing. So I think, to answer my own question, some good news about this election is actually something that I think it's going to make people more conscious of how they vote, and more aware. It's going to increase more voting by mail, it's going to make voting easier. It's going to make it easier to register. It's going to make it easier to vote or vote by mail if you want. And hopefully that will turn into high turnout as well. But I think that's some good news, is that people are thinking more about how they vote. We're thinking more about everything, but we're definitely thinking more about the mechanics of voting, and we're putting some attention to it. Brian, what about you?
Look, it's kind of a dual-edged sword. I think it's unfortunate that we're having these conversations about what is true, what is not true, misinformation, disinformation. But on some level, the fact that we're actually having the conversation, and the conversation is occurring on the right, on the left, in the center, in the media, means that there is a desire to kind of maybe get back to that point where we can come to a consensus on truth, right? And so even by having the conversation, we're acknowledging that there is an obstruction of truth, right? So that would be my kind of hope, that we can get back to a place where things aren't quite so polarized, and there is some kind of consensus on how we can move forward on some of these issues, and have some more unification around the truth. That would be my hope. We'll see.
I guess I would say that I think this is a moment that shows that government matters, regardless of what side of the political aisle you're on. Having a government matters. I mean, in the time of a pandemic, or again, we do not know what is going to happen over the next 6 months. There is a reason, and we know it's like in vogue to hate Washington, et cetera, but there are some very hardworking, smart people here, who are in this government, other people who are running for office. I think having government matters. So I hope that, when people see all this unfold, they are actually more engaged and more people turn out to vote, regardless of who you support. Vote. It's an amazing, a right that we have here that everyone does not have. So, we're seeing the government play out in real time, every day, every minute. So vote. Do your part.
Well, Jenny Backus, Brian Jones, Jeff Zeleny, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for a lot of reasons. Your willingness to participate in this kind of conversation is so important to the kind of education we're trying to deliver at Brown and elsewhere. Whether you're associated with Brown or not, I deeply appreciate your willingness to do this. And, your civicness expressed in this conversation, I think, is a great model for all of us, and a foundation for the kind of social discourse we all need to have more of. And last, but by no means least, I again want to congratulate the class of 2020 and really thank everybody for participating today. Thank you all, and let's keep talking.